At least the 5th time since they'd left their lodgings that morning, Mrs. Fillmore reached into the back pocket, the small pocket in the bodice of her dress, and withdrew her ever-present timepiece. It was a lovely feminine version of what is normally a very masculine accessory, but Louisa found it to be off-putting and an affectation, especially at this moment when instead of displaying her much heralded competence in the field of international travel, Mrs. Fillmore seemed more restless and distracted than all of them. "We departed before dawn, Mrs. Fillmore. It's hard to imagine we're in any danger of being late," offered Louisa. "We're not," replied Mrs. Fillmore crisply as she snapped the embossed gold cover of her watch to a close and returned it to its resting place. "I do, however, have something for each of you before we embark, and I believe now is the time to dispense it, if you would be so kind as to wake the others." Louisa reached across the carriage to Nanny, who required considerable jostling to waken, while Mason, never a heavy sleeper, was already alert of her own accord. Mrs. Fillmore signaled for the driver to halt the carriage. Once they were fully stopped, she reached under her seat to retrieve her carpet bag, out of which she extracted a prodigious silver flask, along with a black velvet sack that clicked in her hands until it was peeled back to reveal several small, thick-bottomed drinking glasses. "Is everyone awake now?" Mrs. Fillmore asked, a bit too brightly, smiling the way people do when talking to small children or people with addled minds. "This," she said, holding up the flask in demonstration, "is one of my best-kept travel secrets. It is a special tonic recommended highly by Mr. Mayburn's own private physician for the benefit of all first-time visitors to the continent, especially gently bred English ladies such as yourselves, whose delicate constitutions are unaccustomed to the rigors of strange accommodation and foreign fare." She handed each of her companions a heavy-bottomed glass and began to carefully pour out about 2 ounces of viscous brown liquid into each one. "There we go, ladies. Drink up." Louisa peered suspiciously at the mud-colored contents of her glass. She had been planning this trip for years and had read every available travel publication and spoke to seasoned travelers, and she could not remember ever once hearing of such a tonic. "We had no such medicaments on our trip to America," she remarked, feeling unaccountably resistant to the whole idea. "And you were quite seasick, weren't you?" Mrs. Fillmore replied with alacrity. "This mixture has the added benefit of preventing many of the digestive disorders common aboard ships, as well as its other uses. Do drink up, Miss Archer. It's best if it takes its effects before one boards the vessel. Aren't you having any?" "Oh, goodness, no," said Mrs. Fillmore. "I've long since become accustomed to the effects of the sea." Louisa looked across the carriage at Mason and Nanny, neither of them enthusiastic about this little surprise. They were waiting to take their cue from her. Mrs. Fillmore's eyes narrowed. "Come now, Miss Archer, you must cooperate. Mr. Mayburn was quite insistent that I take every precaution regarding your well-being on this trip, and I know he would hate for me to have to notify him that I'm unable to do so. He would be most displeased, and I believe that it would not bode well for your future prospects to disappoint him." Louisa felt her face grow warm with pique. It galled her to be at the mercy of a man like Roger Mayburn, especially considering their history. If only father hadn't been so ill, and if only her stepmother hadn't been so desperate for a wedding, perhaps Marguerite would not have married such an odious man. But she had, and they were all living with the consequences. But now, at last, Louisa was on the verge of having weeks of freedom from all of them. It had taken all of her powers of self-control and persuasion to get them to let her go, and she didn't want to do anything to jeopardize this sliver of independence that she had won. So with as deep a breath as her unyielding undergarments would allow, she did what well-bred ladies are supposed to do. She got her feelings under wraps and courteously acquiesced. "Very well," she primly replied, and then swallowed the syrupy mixture in a single gulp, which was not at all ladylike. But under the circumstances, it turned out to be a wisest choice, because if she had stopped and sipped it and tasted it first, she never would have been able to finish. It was ghastly, thick and bitter, burning like brandy, with an aftertaste she vaguely recognized but could not name. She coughed and her eyes watered, but she managed to hold it all down. Nanny and Mason both watched, each with their noses wrinkled, each considering her own full glass. "Well, go on then, the both of you. We can't stay here all day," chided Mrs. Fillmore. Mason followed her mistress's lead and slugged down the vile concoction as Nanny edged the glass to her pursed lips and braved a dainty sip. She made such a face that Louisa had to turn away to keep from smiling. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Fillmore," Nanny spoke in her mild burr. "I'm sure you know what's best and all, but I'm no gentle-bred English lass, and I don't care much for the smell of this, whatever you call it, and I don't think I'll be needing such a thing, and I'm not sure I could manage to swallow it even if I did." "Oh, yes, you can." Each syllable crackled threateningly. "You can, Mrs. Grant, and you will, for your own good and for Miss Archer's. Honestly, you should be grateful I don't insist you take a second dose. A woman of your excessive girth should likely have at least 2. It was a wounding blow, and Nanny winced. "As you wish then, Mrs." Nanny grumbled through clenched teeth as she pinched her nose with her free hand and emptied the glass into her mouth. She swallowed audibly and then closed her eyes and bowed her head as if she were praying. Alarmed by Mrs. Fillmore's harshness, Louisa reached across the carriage to comfort Nanny as best she could in such confined quarters. "See here, Mrs. Fillmore," she spoke over her shoulder, "that was uncalled for. I'm willing to abide by your expertise in matters of travel. However, I will not have you speaking to Nanny Grant that way. Regardless of your position with the Mayborns, you are still an employee, and there is no cause for rudeness." Mrs. Fillmore's attempt at contrition did little to disguise the contempt in her voice. "Of course, Miss Archer, my humblest apology to you and to Mrs. Grant. Now, if you will return the glasses to me, I will signal to the driver to continue on. We have lingered here far too long as it is." Once the carriage was in motion, Mrs. Fillmore checked her pocket watch yet again, snapping it shut, and sighed in what appeared to be relief. Louisa continued to sit forward, which was quite uncomfortable, but Nanny was shaken, so she continued to hold the old woman's fleshy hand. Nanny had been caring for Louisa since birth. She should long since have been retired, but with both Louisa's parents deceased, she could not bear to send Nanny away to Aberdeen to live among distant relatives, so Nanny Grant stayed on as if Louisa were still a child and fussed over her like a broody hen. Over the years, Nanny's weakness for sweets and rich sauces had made her a bit more than pleasantly plump, but no one would ever think to make mention of it, especially in her presence. Mrs. Mason leaned forward also, turning sideways in her seat, and stroked Nanny's other hand in solidarity. This protective posture created a shield around their wounded triumvirate, and Mason and Louisa exchanged conspiratorial glances. Something would have to be done about Mrs. Fillmore and Mr. Mayborn's expanding influence over Louisa's life and the future of her estate. But at the moment, what that something might be, Louisa could not fathom. The popular view was that she should find a husband as soon as possible, but how could she even consider such a thing while she was still in mourning? As Nanny relaxed, Louisa sat back in her seat, drifting into her own thoughts again. Several minutes passed when she was brought around by the sensation that her nose was uncomfortably cold. A strange numbness was spreading over her face, to her cheeks and lips, into her mouth and down her neck. She looked at her companions. Nanny had already fallen to sleep, but Mason, who was now leaning awkwardly against the backrest of her own seat, looked stunned. "Miss Lou," but the power of speech seemed to fail her, and she lost the last syllable, and blindly she reached out her hand in Louisa's direction, only to have it collapse into her lap. Her eyes rolled back and fluttered for a moment, and then she was unconscious. "Mason!" Louisa gasped. But the numbness was spreading quickly along her own arms and up her legs, and as the edges of her vision began to blur and darken, closing inward, it took all of her resolve to make her head turn. The last thing she saw was Mrs. Fillmore smiling. It was not a pretty smile. Thank you.